Of the irrational part, again, one division seems to be common to all things that live, and to be possessed by plants, I mean that which causes nutrition and growth. For we must assume that all things that take nourishment have a faculty of this kind, even when they are embryos, and have the same faculty when they are full grown. At least this is more reasonable than to suppose that they then have a different one. The excellence of this faculty, then, is plainly one that man shares with other beings and not specifically human. And this is confirmed by the fact that in sleep, this part of the soul, or this faculty, is thought to be most active, while the good and the bad man are undistinguishable when they are asleep, whence the saying that for half their lives there is no difference between the happy and the miserable, which indeed is what we should expect, for sleep is the cessation of the soul from those functions in respect of which it is called good or bad, except that they are to some slight extent roused by what goes on in their bodies, with the result that the dreams of the good man are better than those of ordinary people.
However, we need not pursue this further, and may dismiss the nutritive principle, since it has no place in the excellence of man. But there seems to be another vital principle that is irrational, and yet in some way partakes of reason. In the case of the continent, and of the incontinent man alike, we praise the reason, or the rational part, for it exhorts them rightly, and urges them to do what is best. But there is plainly present in them another principle besides the rational one, which fights and struggles against the reason. For just as a paralyzed limb, when you will to move it to the right, moves on the contrary to the left, so is it with the soul. The incontinent man's impulses run counter to his reason. Only whereas we see the refractory member in the case of the body, we do not see it in the case of the soul. But we must nevertheless, I think, hold that in the soul too there is something beside the reason which opposes and runs counter to it, though in what sense it is distinct from the reason does not matter here.
Book 2. Moral Virtue. 1. Excellence, then, being of these two kinds, intellectual and moral. Intellectual excellence owes its birth and growth mainly to instruction, and so requires time and experience, while moral excellence is the result of habit or custom, ethos, and has accordingly in our language received a name formed by a slight change from ethos.
From this it is plain that none of the moral excellences or virtues is implanted in us by nature, for that which is by nature cannot be altered by training. For instance, a stone naturally tends to fall downwards, and you could not train it to rise upwards, though you tried to do so by throwing it up 10,000 times. Nor could you train fire to move downwards, nor accustom anything which naturally behaves in one way to behave in any other way. The virtues, then, come neither by nature nor against nature, but nature gives the capacity for acquiring them, and this is developed by training.
Again, where we do things by nature, we get the power first and put this power forth in act afterwards, as we plainly see in the case of the senses, for it is not by constantly seeing and hearing that we acquire those faculties, but on the contrary, we had the power first and then used it, instead of acquiring the power by the use. But the virtues we acquire by doing the acts, as is the case with the arts too. We learn an art by doing that which we wish to do when we have learned it. We become builders by building, and harpers by harping. And so by doing just acts, we become just, and by doing acts of temperance and courage, we become temperate and courageous. This is attested too by what occurs in states, for the legislators make their citizens good by training, i.e., this is the wish of all legislators, and those who do not succeed in this miss their aim. And it is this that distinguishes a good from a bad constitution.
Again, both the moral virtues and the corresponding vices result from and are formed by the same acts, and this is the case with the arts also. It is by harping that good harpers and bad harpers alike are produced, and so with builders and the rest. By building well they will become good builders, and bad builders by building badly. Indeed, if it were not so,
They would not want anybody to teach them, but would all be born either good or bad at their trades. And it is just the same with the virtues also. It is by our conduct in our intercourse with other men that we become just or unjust, and by acting in circumstances of danger, and training ourselves to feel fear or confidence, that we become courageous or cowardly. So too with our animal appetites and the passion of anger. For by behaving in this way or in that, on the occasions with which these passions are concerned, some become temperate and gentle, and others profligate and ill-tempered. In a word, acts of any kind produce habits or characters of the same kind.
Hence, we ought to make sure that our acts be of a certain kind, for the resulting character varies as they vary. It makes no small difference, therefore, whether a man be trained from his youth up in this way or in that, but a great difference, or rather all the difference.
2. But our present inquiry has not, like the rest, a merely speculative aim. We are not inquiring merely in order to know what excellence or virtue is, but in order to become good, for otherwise it would profit us nothing. We must ask, therefore, about these acts, and see of what kind they are to be, for, as we said, it is they that determine our habits or character. First of all, then, that they must be in accordance with right reason is a common characteristic of them, which we shall here take for granted, reserving for future discussion the question what this right reason is and how it is related to the other excellences. But let it be understood, before we go on, that all reasoning on matters of practice must be in outline merely, and not scientifically exact. For, as we said at starting, the kind of reasoning to be demanded varies with the subject in hand, and in practical matters in questions of expediency, there are no invariable laws, any more than in questions of health.
And if our general conclusions are thus inexact, still more inexact is all reasoning about particular cases, for these fall under no system of scientifically established rules or traditional maxims, but the agent must always consider for himself what the special occasion requires, just as in medicine or navigation. But though this is the case, we must try to render what help we can.
First of all, then, we must observe that, in matters of this sort, to fall short and to exceed are alike fatal. This is plain, to illustrate what we cannot see by what we can see in the case of strength and health. Too much and too little exercise alike destroy strength, and to take too much meat and drink, or to take too little, is equally ruinous to health. But the fitting amount produces and increases and preserves them. Just so, then, is it with temperance also, and courage, and the other virtues. The man who shuns and fears everything and never makes a stand becomes a coward, while the man who fears nothing at all but will face anything becomes foolhardy. So, too, the man who takes his fill of any kind of pleasure and abstains from none is a profligate, but the man who shuns all, like him whom we call a boor, is devoid of sensibility. Thus, temperance and courage are destroyed both by excess and defect, but preserved by moderation.
But habits or types of character are not only produced and preserved and destroyed by the same occasions and the same means, but they will also manifest themselves in the same circumstances. This is the case with palpable things like strength. Strength is produced by taking plenty of nourishment and doing plenty of hard work. And the strong man, in turn, has the greatest capacity for these. And the case is the same with the virtues. By abstaining from pleasure, we become temperate. And when we have become temperate, we are best able to abstain. And so with courage. By habituating ourselves to despise danger and to face it, we become courageous. And when we have become courageous, we are best able to face danger.
3. The pleasure or pain that accompanies the acts must be taken as a test of the formed habit or character. He who abstains from the pleasures of the body and rejoices in the abstinence is temperate, while he who is vexed at having to abstain is profligate. And again, he who faces danger with pleasure, or, at any rate without pain, is courageous. but he to whom this is painful is a coward. For moral virtue, or excellence, is closely concerned with pleasure and pain. It is pleasure that moves us to do what is base, and pain that moves us to refrain from what is noble. And therefore, as Plato says, man needs to be so trained from his youth up as to find pleasure and pain in the right objects. This is what sound education means. Another reason why virtue has to do with pleasure and pain is that it has to do with actions and passions or affections. But every affection and every act is accompanied by pleasure or pain. The fact is further attested by the employment of pleasure and pain in correction. They have a kind of curative property, and a cure is effected by administering the opposite of the disease.
Again, as we said before, every type of character, or habit, or formed faculty is essentially relative to and concerned with those things that form it for good or for ill. But it is through pleasure and pain that bad characters are formed. That is to say, through pursuing and avoiding the wrong pleasures and pains, or pursuing and avoiding them at the wrong time, or in the wrong manner, or in any other of the various ways of going wrong that may be distinguished. And hence, some people go so far as to define the virtues as a kind of impassive or neutral state of mind. But they err in stating this absolutely, instead of qualifying it by the addition of the right and wrong manner, time, etc. We may lay down, therefore, that this kind of excellence, i.e., moral excellence, makes us do what is best in matters of pleasure and pain, while vice or badness has the contrary effect. But the following considerations will throw additional light on the point.
There are 3 kinds of things that move us to choose, and 3 that move us to avoid them. On the one hand, the beautiful or noble, the advantageous, the pleasant. On the other hand, the ugly or base, the hurtful, the painful. Now, the good man is apt to go right, and the bad man to go wrong, about them all, but especially about pleasure. For pleasure is not only common to man with animals, but also accompanies all pursuit or choice. Since the noble and the advantageous also are pleasant in idea. Again, the feeling of pleasure has been fostered in us all from our infancy by our training, and has thus become so ingrained in our life that it can scarce be washed out. And indeed, we all more or less make pleasure our test in judging of actions. For this reason, too, then, our whole inquiry must be concerned with these matters, since to be pleased and pained in the right or the wrong way has great influence on our actions.
Again, to fight with pleasure is harder than to fight with wrath, which Heraclitus says is hard. And virtue, like art, is always more concerned with what is harder. For the harder the task, the better is success. For this reason also, then, both moral virtue or excellence and the science of the state must always be concerned with pleasures and pains. For he that behaves rightly with regard to them will be good, and he that behaves badly will be bad. We will take it as established, then, that moral excellence or virtue has to do with pleasures and pains, and that the acts which produce it develop it, and also, when differently done, destroy it, and that it manifests itself in the same acts which produced it. 4. But here we may be asked what we mean by saying that men can become just and temperate only by doing what is just and temperate. Surely it may be said, if their acts are just and temperate, they themselves are already just and temperate, as they are grammarians and musicians if they do something grammatical or musical. We may answer, I think, firstly, that this is not quite the case even with the arts. A man may do something grammatical or write something correctly by chance, or at the prompting of another person. He will not be grammatical till he not only does something grammatical, but also does it grammatically, or like a grammatical person, i.e., in virtue of his own knowledge of grammar.
But secondly, the virtues are not in this point analogous to the arts. The products of art have their excellence in themselves, and so it is enough if, when produced, they are of a certain quality. But in the case of the virtues, a man is not said to act justly or temperately, or like a just or temperate man, if what he does merely be of a certain sort. He must also be in a certain state of mind when he does it. That is, first of all, he must know what he is doing. Secondly, he must choose it and choose it for itself. And thirdly, his act must be the expression of a formed and stable character. Now, of these conditions, only one, the knowledge, is necessary for the possession of any art. But for the possession of the virtues, knowledge is of little or no avail, while the other conditions that result from repeatedly doing what is just and temperate are not a little important, but all important. The thing that is done, therefore, is called just or temperate when it is such as the just or temperate man would do. But the man who does it is not just or temperate unless he also does it in the spirit of the just or the temperate man.
It is right, then, to say that by doing what is just, a man becomes just, and temperate by doing what is temperate, while without doing thus, he has no chance of ever becoming good. But most men, instead of doing thus, fly to theories, and fancy that they are philosophizing and that this will make them good, like a sick man who listens attentively to what the doctor says and then disobeys all his orders. This sort of philosophizing will no more produce a healthy habit of mind than this sort of treatment will produce a healthy habit of body. 5. We have next to inquire what excellence or virtue is. A quality of the soul is either A, a passion or emotion, or B, a power or faculty, or C, a habit or trained faculty, and so virtue must be one of these three. By A, a passion or emotion, we mean appetite, anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, love, hate, longing, emulation, pity, or generally that which is accompanied by pleasure or pain. By B, a power or faculty, is that in respect of which we are said to be capable of being affected in any of these ways, as for instance, that in respect of which we are able to be angered or pained or to pity. And C, a habit or trained faculty, is that in respect of which we are well or ill-regulated or disposed in the matter of our affections, as for instance, in the matter of being angered, we are ill-regulated if we are too violent or too slack, but if we are moderate in our anger, we are well-regulated, and so with the rest. Now the virtues are not emotions, nor are the vices, because we are not called good or bad in respect of our emotions, but are called so in respect of our virtues or vices. We are neither praised nor blamed in respect of our emotions. A man is not praised for being afraid or angry, nor blamed for being angry simply, but for being angry in a particular way. But we are praised or blamed in respect of our virtues or vices, because we may be angered or frightened without deliberate choice, but the virtues are a kind of deliberate choice, or at least are impossible without it. And because in respect of our emotions we are said to be moved, but in respect of our virtues and vices we are not said to be moved, but to be regulated or disposed in this way or in that. For these same reasons also, they are not powers or faculties, for we are not called either good or bad for being merely capable of emotion, nor are we either praised or blamed for this. And further, while nature gives us our powers or faculties, she does not make us either good or bad. This point, however, we have already treated.
If, then, the virtues be neither emotions nor faculties, it only remains for them to be habits or trained faculties.
6. We have thus found the genus to which virtue belongs, but we want to know not only that it is a trained faculty, but also what species of trained faculty it is. We may safely assert that the virtue or excellence of a thing causes that thing both to be itself in good condition and to perform its function well. The excellence of the eye, for instance, makes both the eye and its work good, for it is by the excellence of the eye that we see well. So the proper excellence of the horse makes a horse what he should be, and makes him good at running, and carrying his rider, and standing a charge. If then this holds good in all cases, the proper excellence or virtue of man will be the habit or trained faculty that makes a man good and makes him perform his function well. How this is to be done we have already said, but we may exhibit the same conclusion in another way, by inquiring what the nature of this virtue is. Now, if we have any quantity, whether continuous or discrete, it is possible to take either a larger or too large, or a smaller or too small, or an equal or fair amount, and that either absolutely or relatively to our own needs.
By an equal or fair amount, I understand a mean amount, or one that lies between excess and deficiency. By the absolute mean, or mean relatively to the thing itself, I understand that which is equidistant from both extremes, and this is one and the same for all. By the mean relatively to us, I understand that which is neither too much nor too little for us, and this is not one and the same for all. For instance, if 10 be larger, or too large, and 2 be smaller, or too small, if we take 6, we take the mean relatively to the thing itself, or the arithmetic mean, for it exceeds one extreme by the same amount by which it is exceeded by the other extreme, and this is the mean in arithmetical proportion. But the mean relatively to us cannot be found in this way. If 10 pounds of food is too much for a given man to eat, and 2 pounds too little, it does not follow that the trainer will order him 6 pounds, for that also may perhaps be too much for the man in question, or too little. Too little for Milo, too much for the beginner. The same holds true in running and wrestling. And so we may say generally that a master in any art avoids what is too much and what is too little, and seeks for the mean and chooses it, not the absolute, but the relative mean.
If then every art or science perfects its work in this way, looking to the mean and bringing its work up to this standard, so that people are wont to say of a good work that nothing could be taken from it or added to it, implying that excellence is destroyed by excess or deficiency, but secured by observing the mean. And good artists, as we say, do in fact keep their eyes fixed on this in all that they do. And if virtue, like nature, is more exact and better than any art, it follows that virtue also must aim at the mean. Virtue, of course, meaning moral virtue or excellence, for it has to do with passions and actions, and it is these that admit of excess and deficiency and the mean. For instance, it is possible to feel fear, confidence, desire, anger, pity, and generally to be affected pleasantly and painfully, either too much or too little, in either case wrongly. But to be thus affected at the right times and on the right occasions, and towards the right persons, and with the right object, and in the right fashion, is the mean course and the best course, and these are characteristics of virtue. And in the same way, our outward acts also admit of excess and deficiency, and the mean or due amount.
Virtue, then, has to deal with feelings or passions, and with outward acts, in which excess is wrong, and deficiency also is blamed, but the mean amount is praised and is right, both of which are characteristics of virtue. Virtue, then, is a kind of moderation, or mesotis, inasmuch as it aims at the mean or moderate amount, domeson. Again, there are many ways of going wrong, for evil is infinite in nature, to use a Pythagorean figure, while good is finite, so that the one is easy and the other hard, easy to miss the mark and hard to hit. On this account also, then,
Excess and deficiency are characteristic of vice. Hitting the mean is characteristic of virtue. Goodness is simple, ill takes any shape. Virtue, then, is a habit or trained faculty of choice, the characteristic of which lies in moderation or observance of the mean relatively to the persons concerned, as determined by reason, that is, by the reason by which the prudent man would determine it. And it is a moderation, firstly, inasmuch as it comes in the middle or mean between two vices, one on the side of excess, the other on the side of defect, and secondly, inasmuch as while these vices fall short or exceed the due measure in feeling and in action, it finds and chooses the mean, middling, or moderate amount.
Regarded in its essence, therefore, or according to the definition of its nature, virtue is a moderation, or middle state, but viewed in its relation to what is best and right, it is the extreme of perfection. But it is not all actions nor all passions that admit of moderation. There are some whose very names imply badness, as malevolence, shamelessness, envy, and, among acts, adultery, theft, murder. These and all other like things are blamed as being bad in themselves, and not merely in their excess or deficiency. It is impossible, therefore, to go right in them. They are always wrong. Rightness and wrongness in such things, for example, in adultery, does not depend upon whether it is the right person and occasion and manner, but the mere doing of any one of them is wrong. It would be equally absurd to look for moderation or excess or deficiency in unjust, cowardly, or profligate conduct. For then there would be moderation in excess or deficiency, and excess in excess, and deficiency in deficiency.
The fact is that just as there can be no excess or deficiency in temperance or courage, because the mean or moderate amount is, in a sense, an extreme, so in these kinds of conduct also there can be no moderation or excess or deficiency, but the acts are wrong, however they be done. For, to put it generally, there cannot be moderation in excess or deficiency, nor excess or deficiency in moderation.
But it is not enough to make these general statements. We must go on and apply them to particulars. For in reasoning about matters of conduct, general statements are too vague and do not convey so much truth as particular propositions. It is with particulars that conduct is concerned. Our statements, therefore, when applied to these particulars, should be found to hold good. These particulars, then, i.e., the several virtues and vices, and the several acts and affections with which they deal, we will take from the following table. Moderation in the feelings of fear and confidence is courage. Of those that exceed, he that exceeds in fearlessness has no name, as often happens, but he that exceeds in confidence is foolhardy, while he that exceeds in fear, but is deficient in confidence, is cowardly. Moderation in respect of certain pleasures and also, though to a less extent, certain pains, is temperance, while excess is profligacy. But defectiveness in the matter of these pleasures is hardly ever found, and so this sort of people also have as yet received no name. Let us put them down as void of sensibility.
In the matter of giving and taking money, moderation is liberality. Excess and deficiency are prodigality and illiberality. But both vices exceed and fall short in giving and taking in contrary ways. The prodigal exceeds in spending, but falls short in taking, while the illiberal man exceeds in taking, but falls short in spending. For the present, we are but giving an outline or summary, and aim at nothing more. We shall afterwards treat these points in greater detail. But besides these, there are other dispositions in the matter of money. There was a moderation which is called magnificence,
For the magnificent is not the same as the liberal man. The former deals with large sums, the latter with small. And an excess which is called bad taste or vulgarity, and a deficiency which is called meanness. And these vices differ from those which are opposed to liberality. How they differ will be explained later.
With respect to honor and disgrace, there is a moderation which is high-mindedness, an excess which may be called vanity, and a deficiency which is little-mindedness. But just as we said that liberality is related to magnificence, differing only in that it deals with small sums, so here there is a virtue related to high-mindedness, and differing only in that it is concerned with small instead of great honors. A man may have a due desire for honor and also more or less than a due desire. He that carries this desire to excess is called ambitious. He that has not enough of it is called unambitious. But he that has the due amount has no name. There are also no abstract names for the characters, except ambition, corresponding to ambitious. And on this account, those who occupy the extremes lay claim to the middle place. And in common parlance, too, the moderate man is sometimes called ambitious and sometimes unambitious. And sometimes the ambitious man is praised, and sometimes the unambitious part. Why this is, we will explain afterwards. For the present, we will follow out our plan and enumerate the other types of character.
In the matter of anger also, we find excess and deficiency and moderation. The characters themselves hardly have recognized names, but as the moderate man is here called gentle, we will call his character gentleness. Of those who go into extremes, we may take the term wrathful for him who exceeds, with wrathfulness for the vice, and wrathlessness for him who is deficient, with wrathlessness for his character. Besides these, there are 3 kinds of moderation, bearing some resemblance to one another and yet different. They all have to do with intercourse in speech and action, but they differ in that one has to do with the truthfulness of this intercourse, while the other 2 have to do with its pleasantness. One of the 2 with pleasantness in matters of amusement, the other with pleasantness in all the relations of life. We must, therefore, speak of these qualities also, in order that we may the more plainly see how, in all cases, moderation is praiseworthy, while the extreme courses are neither right nor praiseworthy, but blamable.
In these cases also, names are for the most part wanting. But we must try, here as elsewhere, to coin names ourselves, in order to make our argument clear and easy to follow. In the matter of truth, then, let us call him who observes the mean a true or truthful person, and observance of the mean truth or truthfulness. Pretense, when it exaggerates, may be called boasting, and the person a boaster. When it understates, let the names be irony and ironical. With regard to pleasantness in amusement, he who observes the mean may be called witty, and his character wittiness. Excess may be called buffoonery, and the man a buffoon, while boorish may stand for the person who is deficient, and boorishness for his character. With regard to pleasantness in the other affairs of life, he who makes himself properly pleasant may be called friendly, and his moderation friendliness. He that exceeds may be called obsequious if he have no ulterior motive, but a flatterer if he has an eye to his own advantage. He that is deficient in this respect and always makes himself disagreeable may be called a quarrelsome or peevish fellow. Moreover, in mere emotions and in our conduct with regard to them, there are ways of observing the mean. For instance, shame is not a virtue, but yet the modest, eidemon, man is praised. For in these matters also we speak of this man as observing the mean, of that man as going beyond it, as the shamefaced man whom the least thing makes shy, while he who is deficient in the feeling or lacks it altogether is called shameless. But the term modest, eidemon, is applied to him who observes the mean. Righteous indignation, again, hits the mean between envy and malevolence. These have to do with feelings of pleasure and pain at what happens to our neighbors. A man is called righteously indignant when he feels pain at the sight of undeserved prosperity,
but your envious man goes beyond him and is pained by the sight of anyone in prosperity, while the malevolent man is so far from being pained that he actually exults in the misfortunes of his neighbors.
But we shall have another opportunity of discussing these matters. As for justice, the term is used in more senses than one. We will, therefore, after disposing of the above questions, distinguish these various senses and show how each of these kinds of justice is a kind of moderation. And then we will treat of the intellectual virtues in the same way.
8. There are, as we said, 3 classes of disposition, namely, 2 kinds of vice, one marked by excess, the other by deficiency, and one kind of virtue, the observance of the mean. Now each is in a way opposed to each, for the extreme dispositions are opposed both to the mean or moderate disposition and to one another, while the moderate disposition is opposed to both the extremes. Just as a quantity which is equal to a given quantity is also greater when compared with a less, and less when compared with a greater quantity, so the mean or moderate dispositions exceed as compared with the defective dispositions, and fall short as compared with the excessive dispositions, both in feeling and in action. E.g., the courageous man seems foolhardy as compared with the coward, and cowardly as compared with the foolhardy. And similarly, the temperate man appears profligate in comparison with the insensible, and insensible in comparison with the profligate man. And the liberal man appears prodigal by the side of the illiberal man, and illiberal by the side of the prodigal man.
And so the extreme characters try to displace the mean or moderate character, and each represents him as falling into the opposite extreme, the coward calling the courageous man foolhardy, the foolhardy calling him coward, and so on in other cases. But while the mean and the extremes are thus opposed to one another, the extremes are strictly contrary to each other rather than to the mean, for they are further removed from one another than from the mean, as that which is greater than a given magnitude is further from that which is less, and that which is less is further from that which is greater, than either the greater or the less is from that which is equal to the given magnitude. Sometimes again, an extreme, when compared with the mean, has a sort of resemblance to it, as foolhardiness to courage or prodigality to liberality. But there is the greatest possible dissimilarity between the extremes.
Again, things that are, as far as possible, removed from each other is the accepted definition of contraries, so that the farther things are removed from each other, the more contrary they are. In comparison with the mean, however, it is sometimes the deficiency that is the more opposed, and sometimes the excess. E.g., foolhardiness, which is excess, is not so much opposed to courage as cowardice, which is deficiency. But insensibility, which is lack of feeling, is not so much opposed to temperance as profligacy, which is excess. The reasons for this are 2. One is the reason derived from the nature of the matter itself, since one extreme is, in fact, nearer and more similar to the mean. We naturally do not oppose it to the mean so strongly as the other. E.g., as foolhardiness seems more similar to courage and nearer to it, and cowardice more dissimilar, we speak of cowardice as the opposite rather than the other. For that which is further removed from the mean seems to be more opposed to it.
This, then, is one reason derived from the nature of the thing itself. Another reason lies in ourselves, and it is this: those things to which we happen to be more prone by nature appear to be more opposed to the mean. E.g., our natural inclination is rather towards indulgence in pleasure, and so we more easily fall into profligate than into regular habits. Those courses, then, in which we are more apt to run to great lengths are spoken of as more opposed to the mean. And thus profligacy, which is an excess, is more opposed to temperance than the deficiency is.
We have sufficiently explained, then, that moral virtue is moderation, or observance of the mean, and in what sense, namely, as holding a middle position between 2 vices, one on the side of excess and the other on the side of deficiency, and as aiming at the mean or moderate amount both in feeling and in action. And on this account, it is a hard thing to be good, for finding the middle,
or the mean in each case is a hard thing, just as finding the middle or center of a circle is a thing that is not within the power of everybody, but only of him who has the requisite knowledge. Thus, anyone can be angry, that is quite easy, anyone can give money away or spend it, but to do these things to the right person, to the right extent, at the right time, with the right object, and in the right manner, is not what everybody can do, and is by no means easy. And that is the reason why right doing is rare and praiseworthy and noble. He that aims at the mean, then, should first of all strive to avoid that extreme which is more opposed to it, as Calypso bids Ulysses, "Clear of these smoking breakers keep thy ship."
For of the extremes, one is more dangerous, the other less. Since then, it is hard to hit the mean precisely, we must row when we cannot sail, as the proverb has it, and choose the least of two evils, and that will be best effected in the way we have described. And secondly, we must consider, each for himself, what we are most prone to, for different natures are inclined to different things, which we may learn by the pleasure or pain we feel. And then we must bend ourselves in the opposite direction, for by keeping well away from error, we shall fall into the middle course, as we straighten the bent stick by bending it the other way.